The glass caught the last of the evening light and held it there, red as a coal, and the three men in fine coats leaned toward it as if it might speak. Around them, the tasting room had gone quiet. On the table sat a single bottle, its label handwritten, its cork already pulled, and a woman in a dust-stained work shirt stood with her arms folded, waiting for the men to finish what they had come so far to do. One of them set his glass down very slowly. He looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he cannot price. Outside, past the window, 40 crooked old vines climbed a slope that everyone in the valley had once agreed was fit for nothing at all. What they did not yet know was how close those vines had come to being torn out and burned. What they did not yet know was that this woman had knelt in that dirt, with her hands buried in root and rot, while the whole valley laughed at her for it. 6 years earlier, she had come to that slope, with nothing but a deed and a stubbornness that frightened people. Her name was Marisol Vega, and she was 29 years old the spring. She took the land, and she was alone. Her uncle had left her the parcel when he died, 12 acres of stony hillside above the valley floor, and the lawyer who read the will had looked at her with something close to pity when he handed over the papers. It was not good land. Everyone said so. The soil was thin and full of stones, the slope too steep for machines, the water uncertain. Her uncle had grown a little of everything there, and prospered at none of it, and when he passed, the neighbors assumed the parcel would be sold to one of the big houses that were buying up the valley, acre by acre, planting the same 3 fashionable grapes in long, straight rows, making the same wine everyone else made and selling it for a great deal of money. That was the future of the valley. Everyone agreed on the future. A woman alone, young, with no husband and no backing and no name in the wine trade, could not possibly stand against it. She would fail, and then she would sell, and the valley would go on as it always did. Marisol did not sell. She moved into the small house at the foot of the slope, the one with the sagging porch, and the well that groaned when you worked the pump, and she began to walk the land. She walked it in the morning before the heat, and she walked it in the evening, when the light went long and gold across the stones, and she looked at everything. She had worked other people's vineyards since she was a girl, pruning and picking and hauling, and she knew the smell of good dirt and bad. This dirt was poor, it was true, but there was one corner of the parcel, up near the top, where the slope faced east and the morning sun struck it first, where something old was growing. 40 vines, gnarled and low and untended, their trunks thick as a man's wrist and twisted like rope. Her uncle had never pulled them, though they gave him almost nothing. They were the last of something. She did not yet know what. The neighbors told her to burn them. The first to say so was a man named Curtis Hale, who owned the largest house in the valley and drove a fine truck and wore a hat that had never seen work. He came up her road in that truck one afternoon in her first month, and he stood with his boots planted wide and looked at the 40 old vines and shook his head slowly. "Those are junk," he told her. "Nobody's grown that grape in 50 years, and there's a reason. Small berries, thick skins, hardly any juice, ripens late and unreliable. You pull those out, and I'll buy the whole slope from you at a fair price, save you the trouble of a hard year." He smiled when he said fair price, and the smile did not reach his eyes. Marisol thanked him and did not sell. When he drove away, the dust hung in the road a long time. She did not know what the grape was, only that it was old, and that her uncle had loved it enough to leave it standing when everything told him to tear it out. So she went looking for someone who might remember. She asked at the feed store and the church and the little diner on the county road, and she got shrugs and half-smiles for her trouble, until an old woman at the diner, wiping down the counter, tilted her head and said, "You want to talk to Silvano Reyes. He came from the old country and he knew all the old grapes, the ones nobody plants anymore. He's up on the Ridge Road if he's still living." Marisol drove up the Ridge Road that same evening. Silvano Reyes was 82 years old and lived in a house full of books and dried herbs and the smell of wood smoke. And when Marisol described the vines to him, the twisted trunks and the small dark berries and the east-facing corner, the old man went very still. He put down his cup. "Take me there," he said. So she did. The next morning, and when the old man climbed slowly out of her truck and walked to the 40 vines and put his cracked hand against the nearest trunk, his eyes went wet. "Tempranella," he said quietly, though that was not the name most people would know it by, only the name his grandfather had used. "I have not seen this in 40 years. They tore it all out, everywhere, because it was hard to grow, and the new grapes were easy money." He turned to her. Your uncle knew what he was keeping." And then he said the thing she would carry with her through everything that followed. "Land does not lie," he told her. "People lie and markets lie, but the land tells you what it wants to grow. This slope wants this grape. It has been telling you, and you were the first in 50 years to stop and listen. That was the beginning of the work, and the work was slow, and it was hard, and no one helped her. Silvano taught her, but Silvano's help was knowledge, not labor, and the labor was hers alone. The 40 old vines were exhausted and neglected, choked with weeds and dead wood. And to bring them back, she had to prune them nearly to nothing and feed the soil and wait. Waiting was the hardest part. A vine does not answer you in a season. She spent that first year clearing and building and learning, and she spent it with almost no money coming in, and she counted her coins at the kitchen table by lamplight, the way a soldier counts cartridges. She had the little her uncle left, and she had what she could earn picking for the other houses in the harvest, swallowing her pride to work the rows of the very men who laughed at her, and she banked every dollar low and quiet like a coal under ash. The arithmetic was brutal, and she did it every night. So much for the well repair, so much for the fencing wire, so much left, and so many months, until anything could possibly come of it. She did not despair. She adjusted. She learned to want less. The valley watched her fail, or waited to. Curtis Hale came back twice more that first year, each time with a slightly lower offer and a slightly warmer smile. And each time he mentioned, as if in passing, how hard it must be for a woman on her own up on that stony hill, how a person alone could never really make a go of a place like that, how there was no shame in selling to someone who understood the land. Marisol listened and said little. She had learned that stillness unsettled a man like Curtis more than any argument. He was accustomed to people who pushed back, because pushing back gave him something to push against. Her quiet gave him nothing. He would leave a little angrier each time, and the dust would hang in the road, and she would go back to her vines. The men who worked for the big houses laughed at her more openly. She would pass them on the county road and hear it, the word junk, the word peasant grape, the low chuckles. One of them called out to her from a truck window that she'd have done better to plant the whole hill in fashionable grapes like a sensible person and sell to Hale when she went broke, which she would, come winter. She lifted her hand to him, not in anger, just a wave, the way you wave at weather. It is easier to believe a thing is worthless than to admit you might have been wrong to mock the person who saw its worth. She understood that about them, and understanding it kept her from hating them most days. In her third year, the old vines answered. Silvano had shown her how to take cuttings, and she had taken them carefully, dozens of them, and rooted them, and coaxed them, and planted them out on the east slope in the poor stony ground that everyone said would grow nothing worth having. And by the third year, the young plants had taken hold, and the old 40 had come roaring back to health. And there was fruit. Not much, but fruit, dark and small and thick-skinned, hanging in tight little clusters that ripened late, so late that she had to hold her nerve through the cold nights of autumn, while every other house in the valley had long since picked and pressed. Silvano stood with her among the vines the day they tasted the ripe berries for the first time, the two of them, alone on the slope in the late light, and he rolled a berry in his mouth and closed his eyes and did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, there it is, 50 years asleep. And it remembers exactly what it is. And Marisol tasted, and beneath the thick skin there was something she had never tasted in all her years in the valley, a darkness and a brightness at once, a wildness the fashionable grapes had bred out of themselves generations ago. She understood, standing there, that she was tasting the past and the future in the same small berry. She made her first wine that autumn, a tiny amount, in second-hand barrels in the cool of the little cellar she had dug by hand into the hillside behind the house. She told no one. Silvano knew, and no one else. She kept it banked low, like the coal it was, because she understood something the valley did not, that a thing shown too soon is a thing dismissed, that the world has to be ready to see. So she let it sleep in the barrel, and she waited again, and she went on picking for the big houses in the harvest to keep her arithmetic from going red. And she said nothing when Curtis Hale, now openly irritated by her refusal to fail on schedule, told the other men at the diner that the Vega girl was throwing good years after bad on a dead grape and would come begging to sell before long. Let them talk. Being right, she had learned, is its own kind of reply, and it does not need to raise its voice. It was in her 4th year that the child came into it. He was a boy of 13 named Thomas, the son of a family that worked one of the middle-sized houses down on the valley floor, and he had a habit of wandering, and one summer evening he wandered up her road and stood at the edge of the old vines, looking at them as if he'd found something. Marisol watched him from the porch. Most children in the valley had been taught to see the vineyards as work and nothing else, rows and rows of core, but this boy looked at her twisted old vines the way Silvano had looked at them, with a kind of recognition. She walked down and stood beside him, and instead of chasing him off, she began to tell him what they were. He came back the next evening, and the one after, and before long he was up on the slope with her most evenings, after his own family's work was done, pulling weeds and learning to prune, asking questions no one else in the valley thought to ask. His own people thought it was foolishness, spending his time on the mad woman's dead grapes, but the boy had found something that was his, and Marisol, who had been alone a long time, found she did not mind the company. It was not a thing she had gone looking for. It arrived like the fruit had arrived, in its own time, from ground she had not known was fertile. The wine slept 2 winters in the cellar, and in the 5th year, Marisol judged it ready, and she did the one thing she had been building toward all along. She did not take it to Curtis Hale. She did not take it to any house in the valley. She loaded a single case into her truck, and she drove 3 hours to the city, to the back door of a restaurant she had read about, a place where a famous chef was said to care about old and forgotten things, and she waited by that back door in the alley heat until someone would see her. The chef was a woman named Delphine Arsenault, sharp-eyed and impatient, and she almost sent Marisol away, until Marisol said the name of the grape, the old name Silvano used, and Delphine's impatience fell off her face all at once. "Where," she said, "where did you get that grape?" "It's gone. It's been gone my whole life." And Marisol pulled the cork on a bottle, right there in the alley, and poured a little into the chef's own cupped glass, and the chef tasted it, standing among the garbage bins in the heat, and she went very quiet, exactly the way Silvano had gone quiet, exactly the way the men in the fine coats would go quiet years later. Then Delphine looked up. "How much do you have?" she asked. And when Marisol told her how little, the chef laughed, not unkindly, and said, "Then I'll take all of it, and I'll pay you what it's worth, and you are going to make more." That was the first outside believer, and word of an outside believer travels faster than any word a neighbor speaks. Delphine put the wine on her list without a price, a thing she never did, and told anyone who asked that it was the most interesting bottle to come out of the valley in 30 years, made from a grape everyone had been fool enough to tear out. And people who trust Delphine came looking, and the road to Marisol's stony hill, which had carried nothing but Curtis Hale's truck and the boy's bicycle and the laughter of the men, began to carry other traffic. Buyers, writers, the curious. She sold that first tiny vintage in a matter of weeks and at a price that made her sit down hard at her kitchen table and do the arithmetic 3 times to be sure she had not dreamed it. It had worked. Everything she had banked low and quiet, the years of stillness while they laughed, the poor stony slope, everyone had written off, all of it had held its coal, and now the coal had caught. The valley noticed the way a valley notices, which is slowly, and then, All at once, the men who had called her grape junk stopped saying it on the county road. Curtis Hale's warm smile turned over one season into something watchful and cold. He came up her road again, but he did not offer to buy the slope now. Now he offered to buy the wine, the whole production, at a price he called generous, to sell under his own famous label with his own famous name, and Marisol understood him completely. He had spent 5 years telling the valley her grape was worthless, and now that a chef in the city had proved him wrong in front of everyone, he wanted to own the thing so he could pretend he had believed in it all along. She thanked him and declined. His jaw tightened. He said, careful, in a voice gone quiet, that a woman alone should think hard about making enemies of the people who ran the valley. Marisol said she would think about everything very hard, and she watched his truck go down her road, and the dust hung there, and she knew the true trouble was only beginning, now that she had something worth taking. The trouble came, as Silvano had said, trouble always comes, from the sky first and from men second. The 6th year opened dry. The winter rains that should have soaked the valley through never fell, or fell in a spatter and stopped, and by spring, the creeks were running thin and the reservoirs the big houses depended on had dropped to lines of cracked mud along their banks. Silvano stood on Marisol's slope in April and looked at the too clear sky and the pale dry stones and shook his old head. This will be a hard year for the valley floor, he said. All those fashionable grapes, all those long straight rows on the flat land, they drink and drink and drink. They were bred for easy water and easy weather. He put his hand on one of the old twisted trunks. But these have roots that go down through the stone 20 feet, because they had to, because nobody ever coddled them, because this poor slope made them fight for every drop their whole lives. He looked at her. Drought does not frighten a thing that was born fighting for water. It frightens a thing that was born spoiled. The drought deepened through the summer into something the oldest people in the valley could not remember the equal of. The heat came in August, like the open door of a furnace, and would not leave. Down on the valley floor, the fashionable grapes, the whole future everyone had agreed upon, began to fail. The vines shriveled on their wires. The berries raisined before they ripened. The big houses ran their wells dry pumping, to save what they could, and the wells drew down until they pulled sand, and one by one, the great straight rows went brown under the white sky. Curtis Hale's vast holdings, all planted in the 3 fashionable grapes that had made the valley rich and had made him richest of all, burned in the sun like everyone else's, worse than most, because he had the most, and it was all the same and all thirsty. It is a terrible thing to watch a man's fortune fail, and Marisol took no joy in it, though she had every reason. She stood on her cool east slope in the furnace of that August and watched the valley floor go brown below her, and up around her the old twisted vines held their small dark clusters green and firm, drinking from water 20 feet down that no drought could reach, exactly as Silvano had said. The thing everyone called junk was the only thing in the valley that did not fail. The fortune of the valley had inverted in a single cruel season, and it had inverted in her favor, and she felt the weight of that more than the triumph of it. Then came the men, and the worst of them was not Curtis Hale at first, but a smoother one, an agent from a large company outside the valley who had heard, in the way these people always hear, that there was one slope in a drought-stricken valley still bearing fruit, and a rare grape besides, and a woman alone running it. He arrived in a clean car with clean hands and a warm, easy manner, and he sat on her sagging porch and told her he loved what she had built, truly loved it, and that he wanted to help her protect it. The valley was dying, he said gently. Everyone around her was ruined. It was only a matter of time before the pressure came, before people who had lost everything looked up at her green slope with hungry eyes, before the taxes and the troubles found her the way they found everyone. He could take all that worry away. He would buy the whole operation, the land, the old vines, the young plantings, the name, the cellar, everything at a price he had written on a slip of paper, which he now slid across the porch table toward her. It was a great deal of money. It was more money than her uncle had seen in his life, And then the man made his single mistake. Leaning back, comfortable, sure of her, he said, "And of course, you'll agree it's more than fair, given that a place like this was never really meant to be run by someone on their own." Marisol looked at the number on the slip a long moment. Then she looked at the man. "How did you know the size of my cellar?" she asked quietly. "I never told you how many barrels I have, and I never told you the size of my plantings." "Who told you?" The smooth man's face did not change much, but it changed enough. A flicker, and she had her answer before he found his words. Because there was only one person in the valley who knew the inside of her operation that well. Only one who had come up her road year after year and counted her barrels with his eyes and measured her rows. Only one who had every reason to want her gone, now that his own fortune lay brown and dead on the valley floor. She stood up from the porch table. "Tell Curtis Hale," she said, "that his slope is welcome to grow whatever it can. And tell him the answer is no, and it will always be no. And it is no more firmly today than it was 6 years ago when he wanted to buy this hill for nothing." The smooth man took his slip of paper and his clean car and left, and the dust hung in the road, and Marisol sat back down and did the arithmetic, not of money now but of something harder to count, of what she owed and to whom, of what kind of person she meant to be with the one green slope in a valley of ruin. Because here was the thing, and it sat on her like Silvano's hand on the old trunk. She had, that terrible year, the only wine grapes in the valley. She could have named any price. The big houses that had laughed at her, the men who had called out junk from their truck windows, they had contracts to fill and buyers waiting, and not a single sound berry of their own. And some of them came hats literally in their hands, up her road, that they had mocked her for driving, to ask whether she might sell them fruit to blend. To save their season, to keep their doors open one more year. Hunger changes a valley, and she could have gouged them. She could have made them pay for every laugh, charged them 10 times a fair price, and watched them choke on it, and been within her rights, and no one, not even Silvano, would have blamed her. She thought about it. She was not a saint, and she thought about it hard, at the kitchen table, by lamplight, doing the arithmetic of revenge. And then she thought about Silvano saying the land does not lie, and she thought about her uncle who had kept 40 worthless vines standing, for no reason but love, and she thought about the boy Thomas, who was 15 now, and stood beside her in the rows, watching to learn not just how to grow a grape, but how to be a person. And she made her choice. She called them together, all of them, the whole valley, the big houses and the small, the men who had laughed and the men who had merely watched, and she asked them to come up her road to the top of the stony slope on an evening in that brown and burning September. They came, uncertain, because no one summons a valley, and no one knew what the Vega woman meant to do with the power a cruel year had handed her. She stood among the old twisted vines, with the dead valley spread out below them all, and she said what she had decided. "I will sell fruit to any house that needs it," she said, "and I will sell it at a fair price. The same price to every one of you, the rich and the ruined alike, and not $1 more than fair, because I have been on the other side of a hard year, and I know what it is to count coins by lamplight and wonder if you will make it to spring." She paused, and, "I will do one thing more." She told them she would give cuttings, free, to any house in the valley that wanted them, cuttings of the old forgotten grape, with the deep roots that no drought could kill, so that no year like this one would ever ruin them so completely again, so that the thing they had torn out 50 years ago in their hunger for easy money could grow again on every hill, and the valley could be a valley of many grapes and deep roots instead of one thirsty fashion. "I am not one woman alone against you," she said, and she looked at them all, and last of all at Curtis Hale, standing at the back with his ruined fields behind him. "I never was. I am only the one who listened when the land was talking, and the land has enough to say for all of us." They were silent, the valley, standing among her vines in the failing light. And then Silvano Reyes, 88 now and leaning on his stick, began slowly to clap his old cracked hands, and the boy Thomas joined him, and then, one by one, awkwardly at first, and then with something like relief, The men who had laughed began to clap too, because it is a heavy thing to have mocked someone, and a lighter thing to be forgiven. And she was offering them the lighter thing. Only Curtis Hale did not clap. No. He stood at the back with his face gone gray, and everyone saw it. Everyone understood at last that he was the one who had sent the smooth man, that he had tried to steal in a bad year what he could not beat in a good one, and no one had to say a word to him. His own greed had stood him at the back of that crowd and lit him up for what he was. He left before the others, and the dust hung in the road behind his fine truck, and in the seasons that followed, his laughter was never heard in the valley again, nor was he much missed. And that is the story the three men in fine coats did not know, sitting in the tasting room with the glass held up to the last of the light like a coal. They were buyers from three of the greatest wineries in the valley, houses that had once called her Grape Junk, and they had come, all three on the same evening by no accident, to beg for an allotment of fruit and cuttings, and to pay whatever she asked, because the drought had taught the whole valley what Silvano had always known, and that the thing born fighting for water outlives the thing born spoiled. One of them set down his glass very slowly and looked at Marisol Vega, 35 now, standing with her arms folded and her hands rough as bark, and he said, "We'll pay anything, you understand, name it." And she looked past him out the window to where 40 crooked old vines climbed the slope that everyone had once agreed was fit for nothing at all, and beyond them the young plantings she had grown from cuttings, and beyond those the first green rows the other houses had put in from the cuttings she'd given away for free. Spreading down the valley now, like a memory coming back to life, she thought of her uncle and of Silvano, who had not lived to see this last part but who had lived to see enough, and she named a price that was fair and no more than fair, the same she charged the smallest house and the poorest widow. And she watched the surprise cross the fine man's face, the way it always crossed their faces, because they had come expecting to be gouged and she would not gouge them, and that, in the end, was the only real power she had ever wanted. Land does not lie, the old man had told her on her very first spring when she was young and alone, and the whole valley was laughing. People lie, and markets lie, but the land tells you what it wants to grow. And the light went red in the glass, and outside the old vines held their fruit against the coming dark, and the valley at long last had learned to listen.